Hi, welcome to the Quipster Film Review Podcast. My name is Vince Leo. I am a film critic for the website Quipster.net. I've been doing film reviews for 20 years now. You can read all of my written work, 3,800 plus film reviews to read anytime. Quipster.net is where to find them all. QWIPSTER.net. Today, I'm going to be reviewing a film. It took me a little bit longer than it normally would to get around to it, but there were just so many movies I'd rather see. It's called War Dogs. It's a drama, comedy, war film. It's rated R because of language throughout, drug use, and some sexual references. It runs an hour and 54 minutes. Miles Teller and Jonah Hill are the main stars, with supporting roles going to Ana de Armas, Bradley Cooper, and Kevin Pollak. The director is Todd Phillips, who also co-writes the screenplay along with Stephen Chin and Jason Smilovich. War Dogs is loosely based on a true story. It was chronicled in a 2011 Rolling Stone article and also a subsequent 2015 book called Arms and the Dudes that was by journalist Guy Lawson. The War Dogs of this film follows two lifelong friends. One is a struggling massage therapist and bedsheet salesman named David Packouz, who's played by Miles Teller, and the other is a two-bit wheeler and dealer called Efraim Diveroli, played by Jonah Hill. These two down-and-out Miami stoners are looking to find a way to make ends meet in a variety of schemes that they hope will give them a leg up. They end up finding a bit of success as small-time dealers of armor, weapons, and ammo for bid on a government-run auction site. They use the site to make a nice sum of cash flying under the radar, trying to secure contracts that are too small for the big dogs to care about. They end up building a pretty nice mini business as a corporation called AEY, and their success eventually leads to bigger and better chances at getting those contracts, and it ultimately leads them to a very sizable one in the form of a contract to supply AK-47 ammo to the Afghan army to the tune of $300 million. After they connect with a shifty big-time weapons dealer named Henry Girard, who's played by Bradley Cooper in a small role, they find that the bigger the contract, the more dangerous the game that they're playing, especially when dealing with black market suppliers in some very shifty, unstable countries. If you know the name Todd Phillips, you know that he is the director of some wildly popular sophomore comedies, Old School being one notable one. The Hangover films are, I guess, the movies that he's most known for. Phillips here seems to be following Adam McKay, who came from the world of kind of sophomore comedies. He ended up directing The Big Short, and that ended up becoming eventually nominated for Best Picture. So I think Todd Phillips may be thinking he could do the same thing. He's trying to push forward this semi-serious topical film about the greed of modern-day American business practices in his film. If you've seen your share of true life films about people who get sucked into the shady world of illegal business dealings, you'll know how the storyline's likely to go. The allure of money sucks them in. Eventually they start to get greedy and they become addicted to this, enough to draw attention from bigger, better, badder players or the government. And then it all becomes too unwieldy for the players after that, and it eventually leads to their demise. So Todd Phillips here, he's obviously, if you've seen the trailer, if you've seen any clips of this movie, you know that he's looking to other great directors for inspiration on how to tell a story. If you've seen the poster or some of the clips from the trailer, you can see that he is very influenced by Brian De Palma's Scarface in particular, including there's a handful of references. You know, it's set primarily in Miami, and then there's also the iconic poster that War Dogs is playing off of. If you actually watch the movie, you can readily tell that Phillips is also inspired by the works of Martin Scorsese, especially in its execution and the form of the film. Goodfellas in particular, you have the use of character narration. Miles Teller's character narrates this film. Freeze frames are used throughout, which is something Goodfellas definitely used to great success. Another Scorsese film that some people will be reminded of just recently, The Wolf of Wall Street. That was a very dark comedy, kind of like this. Jonah Hill's also in that one, playing an immature cad. He was Oscar nominated for that role in that movie. I don't think that he's going to get one for this one. Now, like Scorsese's best, War Dogs features a lot of tracking shots and visual verve, plus the seemingly patented use of Scorsese in a nonstop array of jukebox classic hit songs on the soundtrack that attempt to punctuate each mood of every scene. The selection that's used in War Dogs feels entirely too spot on. I can't give it that much credit. It's like the soundtrack is telling us exactly how we're supposed to view each scene if we just listen to the lyrics or the title of each song. Those songs really should be more driving the pacing and the vibe the way Scorsese does so beautifully in his own films instead of actually putting an exclamation point on each particular scene. The movie is also segmented somewhat into chapter form. We get a line of the script before each particular segment of the film. You know, it's kind of annoying in that way because we start anticipating whenever we see a line that's about to be used later in the film. It's almost like a little spoiler before each segment of the movie, and we can see where things are going to go, and that deflates, I think, our interest as we watch it. Despite those criticisms, I do think that there's an inherent watchability to War Dogs. I did find it moderately interesting, but at the same time, it does feel like a film that I've seen before, you've probably seen before, and definitely done better. Despite Phillips getting the style and the tempo right from the other films that he's drawing inspiration from, the reason why his film fails to coalesce into a movie that's actually worth recommending paying to see in a theater is that the characters aren't defined enough to truly care about. And their story does not seem particularly interesting in and of itself to make a 2-hour movie out of. And although it does deal with some pretty interesting subject matter, it's not really revelatory on the problems that today's war-for-profit ways of doing business. You know, it's ushered in by the likes of Dick Cheney. You know, Dick Cheney's America is referenced in this movie. The idea is that Dick Cheney was trying to foster privatization of government activities such as war. It allowed corporations and companies and even small-time players like those featured in War Dogs to come in and make money off of conflict and death. You know, they're making millions and billions of dollars off of these global conflicts, and it eventually leads to questions as to whether some of these wars are merely pushed forward in order to give these corporations more reason to make money. You know, that would have been a much more interesting film than watching these two guys use the internet in order to make a few bucks here and there, or maybe even a few million bucks here and there. Unlike The Big Short or Goodfellas or The Wolf of Wall Street, as mentioned earlier, there really is not going to be Academy Award love to come War Dogs' way. It remains a middling effort throughout. It feels more like an exercise in director Todd Phillips trying to prove that he can emulate a good film rather than actually trying to tell his own compelling story through this. He doesn't have a uniquely stylish or appropriately dramatic way that he spins his yarn the way that Adam McKay was able to do so dramatically in The Big Short. Todd Phillips seems to try to be outrageous and audacious in the way that he's telling his film, but there's a very subdued, relatively mundane nature of the story that doesn't really fit in with that kind of mood of impudence. This story is merely about a couple of guys who find a way to game the system on the internet to make a lot of money. There's not much in that to suggest the kind of scandalous and moral recklessness that we find Jordan Belfort engages in The Wolf of Wall Street. Instead, there's drama here that revolves mostly around whether David is shading the truth from his girlfriend is, and even along those lines, the girlfriend character was completely invented for this film, which also is kind of disappointing to find out. There's also the way that Ephraim smooth talks his way into deals with various characters that he has to pull aboard in order to secure the contract. I guess that's supposed to be funny, but I don't really think it says that much about the character. He remains kind of enigmatic throughout. They smoke a little weed, they go to strip clubs where, curiously, no clothing actually comes off, but outside of this, there really isn't much to write home about. You know, in real life, these stoners merely sat behind computers or they talked on their phones, they secured all of their contracts this way. They never actually set foot in real war zones to do any gun-running activities. You know, there was no triangle of death, you know, where they almost get killed, as you would see in War Dogs. As such, this is a gangster movie without gangsters and a comedy of perversion and amorality that doesn't have genuinely perverted or amoral people, and that doesn't really work as a film given that Todd Phillips is trying clearly so hard to convince us that it's both. 2.5 stars out of 4 is the best I can give War Dogs. 2.5 stars on my scale means that it had the tools, it had the talent to actually be a worthwhile film going to the theater to see, but yet I cannot recommend it because it is very derivative at its core, and the very loose connection to the real story is just not interesting enough to become its own movie. If you haven't seen them already, it's better to watch The Big Short, The Wolf of Wall Street, Goodfellas, or any of these other movies where they actually are trying to tell a real story. This film feels more like a glorification rather than an indictment on the real world activities that are engaged in by people looking to game the system and become instant millionaires. So 2.5 stars out of 4 for War Dogs, a watchable but ultimately disappointing movie. Thanks everyone for listening. I hope that you enjoyed this review. I'll be reviewing Southside with You coming up next, and then I've gotten a request to review Hell or High Water, and I will be getting to that within a couple of reviews from now. So if this is your first time listening and you haven't clicked the subscribe button, click the subscribe button and you'll get those reviews coming up shortly. Also, if you've been listening a while, you want to support the show, leave a review on iTunes or go to patreon.com/Quipster and leave a donation. If you can go to my website to find out information on how to contact me as well, go to qwipster.net.